Heavy snow fell across Central Europe beginning Saturday evening, February 14, 2026. 4 countries, multiple major airports. Thousands of travellers are facing delays and disruptions. Snow continues to fall across the region. A winter storm that began Saturday evening brought heavy snowfall across the region, with conditions developed as forecast warnings indicated. Stay with me for the next few minutes because we're going to walk through exactly what's happening right now across Switzerland, Germany, Austria and the Czech Republic. We'll look at where this storm came from, why it's causing such widespread disruption, when experts think it'll finally move on, and what comes next for the thousands of people affected by the weather disruptions. This isn't about fear. This is about understanding what's unfolding right now while it's still happening. That's not just Zurich. That same scene played out in Munich, in Vienna, in Prague, across 4 countries. Airports that handle high passenger volumes every month experienced significant operational disruptions because of one weather system that developed as forecasters had predicted for the region. And it's not over. Right now, as you're watching this, snow is still falling across parts of Central Europe. Crews are working around the clock. Some travellers waited in airport terminals or seeking hotel accommodations. Some travellers faced delays returning home. Business travellers experienced schedule adjustments. Holiday plans may have been affected. This storm is notable for several reasons. This isn't just another winter storm story. This is happening in a part of the world that knows winter. Switzerland has the Alps. Germany prepares for the cold every year. Austria and the Czech Republic aren't strangers to snow. These are countries with infrastructure, with systems built for this kind of weather. And yet, this storm created challenges that took time to manage. Several factors contributed to the disruption. What came together to create this level of disruption in places that are usually so prepared? Over the next several minutes, we're going to trace this storm from the moment it began intensifying on Saturday evening, all the way through to Sunday morning. We'll move through each country, look at what's happening on the ground, talk to the experiences of travellers experiencing the disruptions, and break down the weather patterns driving all of this in a way that doesn't require a science degree to understand. You'll see why this storm hit where it did, why airports became the epicenter of the trouble, and what the forecast looks like for the days ahead. If you've ever travelled through Europe, or if you know someone who's there right now, this matters. So here's what I'm asking. Hit the like button if you want to stay informed about what's happening across the world right now. Subscribe so you don't miss updates as this situation continues to unfold. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Are you in Europe? Do you have family or friends affected by this storm? Or are you just someone who wants to understand what's happening beyond the headlines? Let me know. Your perspective matters. And this weather situation continues to develop. Now, let's start where the storm hit hardest. Let's begin in Switzerland, then move east through Germany into Austria, and finally to the Czech Republic. Each country has its own story within this larger weather event. Each airport faced its own unique challenges, and each city is dealing with the ripple effects in different ways. By the time we're done, you'll have the full picture of what this weekend looked like for Central Europe, and what the coming days might bring. But we need to start at the beginning, and the beginning of this story starts with geography, with cold air, and with a weather system that intensified as meteorologists had warned. Let's start in Switzerland because that's where the storm made its most immediate and visible impact. Zurich. If you've ever flown through Europe, there's a good chance you've connected through Zurich Airport. It's one of the continent's major hubs, efficient, clean, known for running on time even in the middle of winter. Swiss precision isn't just a stereotype when it comes to their infrastructure. They plan for snow, they prepare for ice, they have systems in place that are supposed to handle whatever February throws at them. But Saturday evening into Sunday morning, those systems face significant challenges. The snow started falling around early evening. At first it seemed manageable. Ground crews began their standard protocols. Plows hit the runways. Deicing operations ramped up. But the snow didn't slow down. It intensified. Within hours, visibility dropped so low that pilots couldn't safely land or take off. Runways that had just been cleared were covered again in minutes. The snow fell faster than crews could clear it. By late Saturday night, Zurich Airport wasn't just experiencing delays. Operations were suspended for several hours. Flights were grounded, passengers experienced delays. Airport staff worked to determine when operations could resume. But Switzerland wasn't the only country feeling the weight of this storm. Just across the border in Germany, Munich was experiencing similar conditions. Munich Airport is another major European hub. Millions of passengers pass through every year. It connects flights from across the world. And like Zurich, Munich knows how to handle winter weather. the storm intensity exceeded typical winter weather preparations. By Sunday morning, Munich was reporting similar conditions: heavy snowfall, reduced visibility, multiple delays affecting connecting flights. The difference in Munich was the sheer number of connecting flights affected. When Munich slows down, it doesn't just impact Germany. It impacts flights heading to Asia, to North America, to the Middle East. A delay in Munich becomes a missed connection in Istanbul or Dubai or New York. The ripple effect spreads outward from one airport across the entire global network. And here's what made Munich's situation particularly challenging. It wasn't just about clearing snow. It was about managing the flow of aircraft that were already in the air when the storm hit hardest. Planes that had taken off from other cities, expecting to land in Munich within the hour, suddenly found themselves being diverted. Some went to Frankfurt. Some turned around and went back to their origin cities. Some circled, burning fuel, waiting for a window to land. Air traffic controllers were working through a puzzle where every piece kept moving and the rules kept changing based on how fast the snow was falling and how quickly crews could clear the runways between landing windows. Moving east into Austria, the story shifts slightly. Vienna faced snow, yes, but Austria's challenges extended beyond just the capital's airport. This is a country defined by mountains. The Alps run through Austria like a spine, and when a storm like this hits, it's not just cities that feel it. It's mountain passes, it's remote valleys, it's the roads that connect towns across difficult terrain. Travellers who might have thought about renting a car and driving instead of flying quickly realised that wasn't an option either. Mountain passes that are normally kept clear during winter were closing under the weight of the snow. Avalanche risks increased. Emergency services in alpine regions went on high alert. Vienna's airport, while certainly affected, had the advantage of slightly lower snowfall totals compared to Zurich or Munich, but that didn't mean travellers there had it easy. Many flights to and from Vienna were delayed or cancelled not because of conditions in Vienna itself, but because the planes they needed were stuck somewhere else. Aircraft scheduled for Vienna-London routes were positioned at affected airports. The crew that was supposed to operate your evening flight to Paris had been delayed getting into Munich. Even when one airport starts to recover, it takes hours, sometimes days, for the entire system to untangle itself and get back to normal operations. Then there's the Czech Republic, Prague, a city that's become increasingly popular as a European destination in recent years. Prague's airport might not handle the same volume as Zurich or Munich, but it serves as an important connection point for Central and Eastern Europe. And like its neighbours to the west, Prague woke up Sunday morning under a blanket of snow that disrupted the usual rhythm of the city. Flights were impacted. Not as severely as Zurich, perhaps, but enough that travellers trying to get in or out of the Czech Republic found themselves facing the same frustrations: delayed departures, cancelled arrivals, uncertain rebooking options. What's interesting about looking at all four countries together is recognising that while they all experienced the same storm system, each faced unique operational challenges based on their geography and their role in the broader European travel network. Switzerland's airports are hemmed in by mountains, which can create localised weather intensification. Germany's airports are so interconnected with global routes that a disruption there affects continents. Austria's mountainous terrain means the storm's impact extends far beyond runways into roads and mountain communities. And the Czech Republic, while perhaps receiving slightly less snow in some areas, still felt the cascading effects of a weather system affecting multiple countries. It created an interconnected network of disruptions where operational challenges affected multiple locations, and all of it happened within the span of less than 24 hours. So now we understand where this storm hit. We've walked through Switzerland, Germany, Austria, and the Czech Republic. We've seen how airports became the most visible flashpoints of disruption, but also how cities, roads, and infrastructure across the region felt the impact. But knowing where something happened is only part of the story. The question that comes next is when. When did this storm truly begin? When did conditions intensify enough to significantly disrupt major airport operations? Saturday evening, February 14th. For most people across Central Europe, it started as an ordinary winter evening. For most people across Central Europe, Saturday evening began as an ordinary winter evening. The forecast had mentioned snow, sure, but snow in February in Central Europe isn't exactly breaking news. February snowfall is expected in this region, and cities have standard preparations, but somewhere around early evening conditions worsened. The snow that forecasters had predicted started falling, and it didn't stop. More importantly, it didn't fall gently. This wasn't the kind of snow that drifts down slowly, the kind you can watch from your window with a cup of tea. This was heavy, wet snow, the kind that accumulates fast, the kind that sticks to everything: roads, roofs, runways. Within the first hour, people started noticing that this felt different. At Zurich Airport, operations were still running smoothly around early evening. Flights were taking off, flights were landing. Ground crews were out doing their jobs, clearing snow as it fell, keeping runways operational. This is what they do. This is what Swiss efficiency is built for. But by mid-evening, the reports from the ground crews started changing. The snow wasn't just falling, it was intensifying. Ploughs that had just cleared a runway would come back around 30 minutes later to find it covered again. Visibility, which had been acceptable, started dropping. Pilots started reporting difficulty seeing approach lights. Air traffic controllers started extending spacing between aircraft. And then, within a span of about 2 to 3 hours, conditions worsened significantly. What had been manageable became overwhelming. Zurich Airport made the decision to temporarily suspend operations. Not a full shutdown in the technical sense, but close enough. No new flights could land. No departures could take off. The airport essentially froze in place while crews fought to regain control of the runways. Departure boards reflected changing flight statuses. Delay, delay, cancelled, delay, cancelled. Multiple delays occurred in sequence. Munich's timeline was similar, though slightly delayed. The snow hit Munich a bit later than Zurich, but when it arrived with the same intensity. By late Saturday night, Munich Airport was reporting significant delays across the board. Some flights managed to get out before conditions worsened. Some international arrivals landed just before the worst of it hit. But by midnight, Munich was in the same situation as Zurich. Limited operations, massive delays, many passengers experiencing delays with no clear timeline for when things would improve. Vienna and Prague experienced their peak disruptions slightly later, moving into the early morning hours of Sunday. The storm system was massive, covering a large area, and it moved across the region over the course of many hours. So while Zurich and Munich were already managing significant disruptions by midnight, Vienna and Prague were just beginning to see their heaviest snowfall. By Sunday morning, all 4 countries were affected by the storm. Here's what makes the timing of all this particularly important. Saturday evening into Sunday morning is a high-traffic time for European airports. You have weekend travellers trying to get home before the work week starts. You have business travellers positioning themselves for Monday meetings. You have families wrapping up holiday trips. The storm occurred during a high-traffic travel period. That timing amplified the impact. More people affected, more flights disrupted, more logistical nightmares to untangle, and throughout all of this, the snow kept falling. Sunday morning arrived, and while the intensity had lessened in some areas, it hadn't stopped. Zurich woke up to runways still partially covered. Munich was still working through a backlog of delayed flights. Vienna and Prague were dealing with fresh accumulation. The storm that had started Saturday evening was still present Sunday morning, still causing problems, still keeping thousands of people in a state of uncertainty. But while travellers were experiencing the timeline from inside terminals, outside something else was happening. A weather system was moving across Central Europe, driven by forces that most people don't think about until they're delayed at an airport during heavy snowfall. So now that we know when this storm hit, the next question becomes, why? What drives a storm like this? What makes heavy snow fall in one place and not another? Now, I'm not a meteorologist, but the weather experts who study these systems describe what's happening in terms that actually make sense once you break it down. And it's worth understanding because it explains not just why the snow fell, but why it fell so heavily in these particular places at this particular time. Weather, at its most basic level, is about air. Specifically, it's about what happens when different types of air meet each other. Think about opening your freezer door on a warm summer day. You see that cold air spilling out, meeting the warm air in your kitchen, and suddenly there's condensation, maybe even a little fog. That's 2 different air masses colliding. Scale that up to the size of countries, and you get weather systems. You get storms. What happened over Central Europe this past weekend was a collision between cold air coming down from the north and warmer, moisture-heavy air coming up from the south. The technical term is a cold core low-pressure system, but let's just call it what it is. Cold air meets warm air, and when they meet in just the right way, you get snow. A lot of snow. The cold air was sitting over northern Europe for days before this storm developed. very cold temperatures, the kind that keeps temperatures well below freezing across Scandinavia and parts of northern Germany. That cold air was stable. Cold air remained positioned over the region, but then the warm air started pushing up from the Mediterranean. Warm air contained moisture. Water vapour that had evaporated off the sea travelled north and was now meeting this wall of cold air sitting over Central Europe. When warm, moist air meets cold air, the moisture can't stay as vapour. The moisture condenses, freezes and falls as snow, and the heavier the moisture content in that warm air, the heavier the snow that results. This weekend the moisture content was significant. The Mediterranean had been relatively warm. That meant the air pushing north was loaded with water vapour. When it hit the cold air mass over Switzerland, Germany, Austria and the Czech Republic, the moisture condensed and fell as snow. But there's another factor that made this storm particularly intense in the areas we've been talking about: geography. Central Europe isn't flat. Switzerland is famous for its Alps. Austria is defined by mountains. Even parts of Germany and the Czech Republic have elevated terrain. When moist air is forced to rise over mountains, it cools even faster. That cooling accelerates the condensation process. It squeezes more moisture out of the air in a shorter amount of time. Meteorologists call this orographic lift, but you can think of it like wringing out a wet towel. The mountains wring the moisture out of the air, and it falls as snow. So you had cold air from the north, moist air from the south, mountains in between. All the ingredients for a significant snowfall event were lined up perfectly, and that's exactly what happened. The storm intensified right over the region that was least able to absorb that much snow that quickly, even with all their preparation. Weather systems move across regions. Weather systems like this don't stay in one place. This system moved slowly across the region, which is part of why the snow lasted so long and accumulated so much. If the system had raced through in a few hours, you'd have gotten snow, sure, but not the kind of totals that shut down airports. The slow movement meant the snow fell steadily for many hours. It gave the system time to dump more and more precipitation over the same areas. The storm also had another characteristic that made it particularly troublesome. It was a tight system. The heavier snow was concentrated in a relatively narrow band. That's why you had airports in Switzerland and Munich hit hard while other parts of Europe, even just a couple hundred miles away, saw little to no snow. Weather doesn't spread evenly. Weather systems affect different areas with varying intensity. This storm's tight core meant that the places it hit got hit hard, while neighbouring regions might have had a dusting or clear skies. Understanding all of this helps answer the question. People delayed at airports were asking, why here? Why now? Why this much? The answer is that weather doesn't happen randomly. It happens because of patterns, air movements, temperature differences, geography, moisture. All of it coming together in ways that can be predicted to some degree but not controlled. Forecasters saw this storm coming. They knew snow was likely. But the intensity, the exact timing, the specific locations of the heaviest bands, those details don't become clear until the storm is already underway. And here's the thing that's important to remember. This isn't some once-in-a-century event. Cold core storms happen regularly during winter in Europe. The Alps get snow every year. Munich and Zurich deal with winter weather as a matter of routine. What made this particular storm notable wasn't that it was unprecedented. It was that it hit with enough force, over a concentrated enough area, during a busy enough travel period, that it overwhelmed systems designed to handle exactly this kind of weather. It exceeded standard winter weather preparations. Weather experts will study this storm for weeks. They'll analyse the data. They'll refine their models. They'll look at what was predicted accurately and what wasn't. But for the people living through it right now, the science is secondary. What matters is that the snow fell, the airport's closed, and thousands of people are delayed. The why is interesting, but the when will it end is far more urgent. And that's the question we need to turn to next. Because understanding what drove this storm is one thing. Knowing when it's going to move on, when conditions will improve, when airports can fully reopen, and travellers can finally get to where they're trying to go. That's the key question for those affected. The storm brought significant snowfall. We've seen where and when and why. Now we need to look forward. What does the forecast say? What comes next? When does this finally end? And what does recovery look like for a region that received heavy snowfall over the past day? Step outside the airports for a moment because the storm's impact extended far beyond terminals and runways. This weekend, while thousands of travellers were delayed at airports, Residents across Switzerland, Germany, Austria, and the Czech Republic were waking up to cities that received significant snowfall. And while these are countries that know how to handle winter, there's a difference between being prepared and being able to instantly solve every problem a major snowfall creates. In Zurich, the city itself was dealing with its own challenges. Public transportation, which normally runs with the same precision as the airport, faced delays. Trams move on tracks, and when those tracks are covered in snow and ice, the trams slow down or stop. Buses navigate streets, and when those streets haven't been fully ploughed yet, routes get adjusted or cancelled. For residents who rely on public transit to get to work, to visit family, to go about their weekend plans, the storm meant adjusting expectations. Zurich's city services responded the way they're trained to. Plough trucks worked through the night. Salt spreaders covered main roads. Sidewalks in busy areas were cleared. But there's only so much ground you can cover in a few hours, and the snow kept falling. Side streets, residential areas, less travelled routes, those came second. Residents in areas off main thoroughfares may have found their streets not yet cleared by Sunday morning, requiring personal snow removal efforts. This is the reality of significant snowfall even in well-prepared cities. Munich faced similar situations. The city's public transit system is extensive, and U-Bahn trains mostly run underground, so they were less affected. But span trains, which connect the city centre to suburbs and surrounding areas, run above ground. Some of those lines experienced delays or reduced service. Buses struggled with snow-covered roads, and just like in Zurich, the priority was keeping main arteries clear first, then working outward to neighbourhoods. For people who had plans that weekend, dinner reservations, visits with friends, shopping trips, many of those plans got cancelled or postponed. Not because it was impossible to go out, but because it was difficult. Travel times doubled. Parking was harder to find under layers of snow. Visibility was poor. People made the reasonable choice to stay home, stay warm, and wait for conditions to improve. And Austria's challenges extended beyond Vienna into the mountainous regions. Alpine roads are challenging even in good conditions. Steep grades, sharp turns, narrow passages, heavy snow creates challenging road conditions. Mountain passes that connect valleys and towns were closed as the snow accumulated. Avalanche control teams were out assessing risks, sometimes triggering controlled slides to prevent larger uncontrolled ones later. These are the kinds of operations that happen behind the scenes that most people never think about, but that are essential for keeping mountain communities safe. Small alpine towns, the kind that rely on winter tourism, found themselves in an odd position. On one hand, snow is good for business if you run a ski resort or a hotel catering to winter sports enthusiasts. On the other hand, if that snow comes down so fast and so heavy that roads close and people can't get to your town, the benefit disappears. Some resorts reported guests who were trying to arrive for the weekend couldn't make it. Some roads were temporarily closed. Others reported guests who were already there decided to extend their stays because travellers chose to wait for improved conditions. In the Czech Republic, Prague dealt with snow accumulation across the city. Prague is beautiful in winter. The old architecture, the bridges, the castle, all of it looks like a postcard when it's dusted with snow. But heavy snow in a city with steep hills, cobblestone streets, and historic infrastructure presents challenges. Ploughing cobblestones without damaging them requires care. Clearing narrow medieval streets takes time. And while Prague's central tourist areas got attention quickly, residential neighbourhoods further from the centre had to wait. The thing to understand about all of this is that these cities weren't paralysed. Life didn't stop. People adapted. Residents went out and shovelled. Neighbours helped each other clear walkways. City crews worked shifts around the clock. Businesses that could open did. Grocery stores stayed stocked. Pharmacies remained accessible. Services continued with adjustments for the weather. It was a disruption. A significant one, but a manageable one, handled by people and systems designed for exactly this kind of weather. What made it harder than usual was the combination of factors: the intensity of the snowfall, the timing over a busy weekend, and the simultaneous impact across multiple countries. If it had been just Zurich dealing with heavy snow, the surrounding region could have helped. If it had been just Munich, the same. But when Switzerland, Germany, Austria, and the Czech Republic are all managing significant snow at the same time, resources get stretched. Crews that might have been available to assist are busy in their own cities. Equipment that might have been borrowed is already in use elsewhere. And there were human elements beyond just inconvenience. Delivery services were delayed. Packages that were supposed to arrive didn't. Grocery deliveries for elderly residents who rely on them got pushed back. Medical appointments were rescheduled. These might seem like small things individually, but when they happen to thousands of people simultaneously, they add up to a meaningful impact on daily life. Emergency services remained operational, of course. Ambulances, fire departments, police. They don't stop for snow. But response times were longer. Roads that might take 5 minutes to drive normally took 15 or 20. Hospitals stayed ready for the possibility of weather-related injuries, slips, falls, car accidents in icy conditions. Fortunately, because people largely stayed cautious and avoided unnecessary travel, major incidents were limited. What's also worth noting is the attitude. People in these countries understand winter. They don't panic when it snows. They adjust, they prepare, they handle it. There's a cultural resilience that comes from living in a place where winter is a fact of life, not an anomaly. So while the storm created real challenges, it didn't create major disruptions in the streets. It created a weekend where people slowed down, helped each other out, and waited for the systems they trust to do their jobs. But slowing down and waiting only works if there's an end in sight. If the snow is going to keep falling indefinitely, that's one situation. If it's going to taper off and move on, that's another. So the question everyone in these cities was asking by Sunday morning was the same question travellers in airports were asking: when does this end? Weather forecasts can change as conditions evolve, but based on the latest information available from meteorological services, there's reason to believe that the worst of this storm has passed, or is in the process of passing. That doesn't mean everything instantly returns to normal, but it does mean the trajectory is toward improvement rather than continued intensification. By Sunday morning, the core of the low-pressure system that brought all this snow was beginning to shift eastward. Weather systems don't stop moving. They're driven by larger atmospheric patterns, and this one was being pushed gradually toward Eastern Europe. For Switzerland and Western Germany, that meant the heavier snow was tapering off. Flurries might continue, light accumulation might still occur, but the intense, heavy snowfall that overwhelmed airports and buried cities was easing. For Munich and parts of Austria, the transition was happening slightly later in the day. By midday Sunday, forecasters expected the snow to lighten considerably. That would give ground crews, city services and airport operations teams the window they needed to really make progress on clearing runways, roads and transit lines. You can't fully clear snow while it's still falling heavily. You can maintain, you can keep up as best as possible, but real progress happens when the precipitation stops and crews can work without fighting fresh accumulation. Prague and the Czech Republic were looking at improvement by late Sunday or early Monday. The storm's eastern edge was moving through, and behind it conditions were expected to clear. Temperatures weren't forecast to warm dramatically, which means the snow that had fallen would stick around for a while, but at least it wouldn't be adding to the problem. Here's what that timeline means practically. For airports, Sunday represented a day of slow recovery. Limited operations in the morning, gradual increases in flight activity through the afternoon and evening as conditions allowed. Airlines working through the backlog of cancelled flights, trying to reposition aircraft, rebook passengers, and get crews where they needed to be. But full normal operations, that was looking more like Monday or even Tuesday in some cases. You have to understand that even when the weather clears, the effects linger. An airport that's suspended operations for several hours doesn't just flip a switch and resume full capacity. Aircraft are out of position. Crews have hit their maximum duty hours and need rest. Passengers who were supposed to leave Saturday are competing for seats with passengers who were supposed to leave Sunday. The system has to absorb all of that delay and work through it methodically. It takes time. For travellers still waiting Sunday morning, the forecast offered hope but not immediate relief. Travellers with flights cancelled Saturday likely faced rebooking for Monday or later. Those scheduled to depart Sunday monitored weather conditions and flight status updates. Airlines were prioritising based on a dozen different factors: aircraft availability, crew availability, passenger connections, route importance. It's a complex puzzle, and solving it doesn't happen instantly. Cities were looking at a similar recovery arc. The snow had to be cleared from roads, and that's a process that takes days, not hours. Main roads first, then secondary roads, then residential streets. Plough crews work in shifts, but there are only so many ploughs, so many drivers, so many hours in a day. By Sunday evening, most major routes across Zurich, Munich, Vienna and Prague were expected to be passable. By Monday, the focus would shift to finishing side streets and ensuring public transit could return to full schedules. Mountain regions in Austria were facing a longer timeline. Avalanche risk doesn't disappear the moment snow stops falling. Fresh snow on steep slopes needs time to settle and stabilize. Avalanche control teams would continue their work through Sunday and into the following week, assessing conditions, triggering controlled slides where necessary, and gradually reopening passes as they deemed it safe. For some alpine communities, the wait to fully reconnect with the outside world might extend several more days. Temperature forecasts were another piece of the puzzle. Cold air was expected to linger over the region for at least the next few days. That meant the snow wouldn't melt quickly. It would stay on the ground, gradually compacting, slowly receding but not disappearing. In some ways that's helpful. Rapid melting can create flooding and other issues. Slow melting gives cities time to manage the snow removal process without the added complication of meltwater overwhelming drainage systems. For anyone planning to travel through Central Europe in the coming days, the advice from authorities was consistent. Check conditions before you go. Confirm your flight is operating before heading to the airport. Allow extra time if you're driving. Expect delays even as things improve. Have backup plans. This is standard guidance after any major weather event, but it's worth repeating because the recovery phase can sometimes be as disruptive as the event itself. One aspect of the forecast that offered some reassurance: no additional major systems were expected immediately behind this one. The weather pattern that created this storm was moving on, and the forecast for the rest of the week showed calmer conditions. Cold, yes, possibly some light snow here and there, but nothing approaching the intensity of what just happened. That gave everyone, airports, cities, residents, travellers, the breathing room needed to recover without worrying about round 2 hitting before they'd finished cleaning up from round 1. It's also worth noting that forecasters will be analysing this storm for weeks. They'll look at what their models predicted accurately and what they didn't. They'll study the intensity, the track, the snowfall rates. Every major weather event becomes a learning opportunity, a chance to refine understanding and improve future forecasts. For the meteorological community, this storm is a case study. For everyone else, recovery is the current priority. So the answer to what comes next is gradual improvement, slow recovery, a return to normal that happens in stages, not all at once. The storm that dominated this weekend is on its way out. The systems and the people affected by it are beginning the process of putting things back together, and while that process isn't instant, it is underway. Now we bring all of this to a close and look at what this weekend meant in the bigger picture. So here we are, Sunday morning, February 15th. Central Europe experiencing significant snow accumulation. Airports are slowly beginning to function again. Cities working through the process of clearing streets and restoring normal operations. Thousands of travellers are still uncertain about when they'll reach their destinations, but at least now there's a sense that the end is in sight. The storm that disrupted operations at some of Europe's busiest airports, blanketed 4 countries in heavy snow, disrupted the plans of countless people. It's moving on. What happened this weekend was significant, but it's also important to keep perspective. Winter storms happen, snow falls, even the best prepared infrastructure can be overwhelmed when conditions align in just the right way. What matters is how systems respond, how people adapt, and how quickly recovery happens. And by all accounts, the response across Switzerland, Germany, Austria, and the Czech Republic has been professional, coordinated, and effective given the circumstances. For the travellers who experienced extended delays, who missed important events, who are still waiting to get home, this weekend was frustrating, exhausting, and deeply inconvenient. That experience is real and valid, but it's also temporary. Flights will resume, airports will clear the backlogs, people will get where they're going. It might take a few extra days, it might cost some additional time and money, but it will happen. For residents of the affected cities, life is already returning to rhythm. The snow that caused such disruption on Saturday is being managed on Sunday. By Monday, most people will be back to their routines. Schools will reopen, businesses will operate, transit will run on schedule. The resilience that comes from living in a place that experiences real winter is on full display. And for the weather itself, it's just doing what weather does. Air moves, temperatures change, moisture falls as rain or snow depending on conditions. Weather systems follow natural patterns. It's a natural system playing out according to physical laws that we understand pretty well, even if we can't control them. This storm was unusual in its intensity and timing, but it wasn't unprecedented. Similar winter weather events occur periodically in this region. Next year, or the year after, something similar will happen somewhere else. That's the nature of weather in regions that experience winter. If there's a lesson in all of this, it's the reminder that even in our modern, interconnected, highly technological world, weather remains a natural factor affecting transportation systems. We can prepare for it. We can build systems to manage it. We can forecast it with impressive accuracy. But we can't eliminate the disruption it causes. We can only respond, adapt, and wait for conditions to improve. Thank you for staying with me through this entire story, for letting me walk you through what happened, where it happened, when it started, why it developed the way it did, and what comes next. This is the kind of event that makes headlines for a day or two, and then fades from the news cycle, but for the people living through it, it's a weekend they'll remember. And hopefully, by understanding the full picture, you have a sense not just of the disruption, but of the response, the resilience, and the recovery. If you found this valuable, if you want to stay informed about events like this as they unfold around the world, hit the subscribe button. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Are you in Europe? Have you travelled through any of these airports? Do you have your own story of being delayed by a storm? I'd love to hear it. Your perspective adds to the conversation, and this is the kind of story that connects people across distances. We'll continue watching as Central Europe recovers from this weekend's storm. We'll keep an eye on the forecast, and if anything significant develops, if conditions change, if new challenges emerge, we'll cover it. Because staying informed isn't about fear or panic. It's about understanding what's happening in the world around us and recognizing that even when disruption occurs, people and systems find ways to manage, to adapt, and to move forward. The snow is still on the ground across Central Europe, but the storm is passing. And in a few days, this will all be a memory, a challenging weekend, a story to tell, and a reminder that winter, even in the modern world, still demands our respect.